Long before modern pharmacology categorized its chemical compounds, ancient civilizations were already using the versatile fibers and properties of the cannabis plant. Fast forward to today, and independent researchers are discovering why our bodies possess an entire biological network called the endocannabinoid system. This is no mistake. This is specifically wired to interact with the particular compounds found in marijuana. Is that odd or what? So today we're looking past the days of reefer madness and the fears and examining the history, the science of whole plant extracts like Rick Simpson oil, and what peer-reviewed studies reveal about how these ancient remedies interact with our own cells. Even back when I was busting my butt in pharmacy school, guys, I was spending countless hours buried in all the synthetic pharmacology and conventional drug mechanisms, but I kept finding myself drawn to natural remedies, a different solution. And that's how ancient healing traditions and raw botanical compounds actually are interacting with the human body. I knew they existed, right? And as a kid, I smoked pot. And I was always inquisitive, and I knew that it had been used historically as medicine before I ever got into pharmacy school. Now, I had to stop using it, obviously, during most of my life until I became retired and became the ex-pharmacist and gave up my license. Or actually, I gave it up until we actually got a medical system because I didn't want to take a chance. I have other professional licenses and stuff, and I didn't want to take a chance. So when Florida went with medical marijuana, that's when I got it. And I had recently been through huge trauma with my dad's death that I've talked to you about before, and I qualified for it. So while the core curriculum in pharmacy school focused heavily on single molecule isolates, chemical extractions of one substance, ephedrine, hydroxychloroquine, that's the chemical that's being extracted. Of course, hydroxychloroquine, chloroquines might be naturally derived, but they're chemical extractions, okay? And but my curiosity always stayed fixed on complex natural products and how plant-based remedies could achieve therapeutic effects, often in a much gentler and more holistic way. That lifelong fascination is ultimately what led me into clinical practice, including my time working with patients at Moffitt Cancer Center, where I saw firsthand how compounds that were derived from the marijuana plant, or actually they weren't derived, they existed, THC capsules, came out, and as a drug named Marinol. And we learned that this could provide profound relief when normal treatment for nausea and the side effects of chemotherapy wasn't doing it. Of course, back then, well, it's even worse now, but of course, back then, we had no medical marijuana here for people to take. And a bottle of this Marinol was about $325 for 60 capsules. So I think that bottle was a month's supply is what they used to get for $365 or $320, something like that. Nowadays, that same $60 bottle is $960. For 60 capsules of a plant that you can just give medical marijuana and smoke it in states. It's just horrible. And I hope that President Trump is reviewing this and understanding that this isn't right. And I understand what he's doing. He's working to decrease prices, drug prices, but he's not making the connection between natural treatment and prevention, somewhat with prevention, with RFK getting all these poisons out of our supply. But President Trump and his regulation so far, I think, needs to make a bigger push towards natural treatment and away from big pharma. And I understand how hard it is from a monetary standpoint. But so patients that needed this help with Marinol, they just had ridiculous costs every month that the insurance company is paying for. And of course, they're paying for the premiums for the insurance. So I've seen an awful lot in the pharmaceutical business, guys. I've watched conventional medicine rely heavily on synthetic isolated compounds while completely overlooking the profound, complex synergy of a whole plant medicine. If you want to keep cutting through the media hype and exploring what independent, peer-reviewed science actually says about natural compounds, historical remedies, and the toxins in our environment that are making us sick, be sure to hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and choose all to join me for our next deep dive. So, to understand where we are today, we have to go back, as we always do, right? Long before modern dispensaries or synthetic molecules ever existed, cannabis was valued by many ancient civilizations primarily for its medicinal properties, but not only. It was also used, as you may know, hemp was used for ropes and building and stuff. But it was also used heavily for medicinal purposes. Dating back thousands of years to early pharmacopoeias like the Emperor Shen Nung's classic text in China, the plant was used to affect a wide spectrum of ailments, including rheumatic pain, inflammation, and gastrointestinal distress. In ancient India, sacred texts and Ayurvedic practices deployed cannabis also to manage anxiety, alleviate inflammation and pain, induce sleep, relax muscles, and counter nausea and digestive issues. Similarly, historical records from Assyrian and Egyptian eras documented its use to lift depression, ease localized pain, and soothe psychological stress. So, it's not like this is anything off the walls, guys. But we were taught differently because the criminalization of cannabis and the rollout of aggressive scare campaigns occurred in the 1930s. And they reveal a calculated pivot by federal authorities occurring precisely as modern drug regulation and federal bureaucracies were gaining power. Always check the timing, always follow the buck, guys. When alcohol prohibition was repealed in 1933, the federal government faced a major dilemma: the newly established Federal Bureau of Narcotics, or FBN. And they were suddenly left with a dwindling mandate to justify its budget, secure its institutional survival, and expand its federal reach. That's how bureaucracy works, guys. That's why big government is so bad. They spend more of our time and our money justifying their existence. And in the process, we don't get clarity. What we get is deception, because they're trying to hide the fact that they have no purpose or minimal purpose, or that it's harming people, and they are secret. They eat our money up like crazy, as you've seen, and big government is never the way to go. We're going to start seeing President Trump do exactly as he should, which is disseminate power. If you have one power structure, guys, that power structure can take control of everything. When you disseminate power to the states or whatever, when you disseminate that power and take away that central control, that's when we can finally become free. So this FBN, Federal Bureau of Narcotics, needed a new target, and that shifted focus to cannabis because alcohol was just legalized, right? So they needed a new target to justify their existence, and that shifted to cannabis. They launched a systematic propaganda campaign. And that campaign relied on yellow journalism, sensationalized stories published through newspaper conglomerates, and radically charged rhetoric to manufacture public panic. So it would appear that the racial divide was being cultivated back in the 30s at least. The cultural engineering culminated in exploitation films like Reefer Madness. Some of you might remember that back in 1936. And that was designed to frighten the public by falsely depicting ordinary people descending into madness, violence, and criminal behavior after consuming the plant. And then riding the wave of this manufactured fear, Congress rushed through the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. Rather than an outright ban, which federal officials worried would overstep their constitutional bounds, the legislation imposed crushing excise taxes, complex registration mandates, and severe penalties. Notably, the statute was enacted against the explicit warnings of the American Medical Association, which pointed out, and they brought up and argued that cannabis was a recognized, effective medicine used by physicians for numerous conditions. So the legislators were operating out of motives other than what was in the best interest of the recommendation of the experts nearly 100 years ago, pushing 100 years ago on this. The FBN bypassed medical consensus entirely, leaning instead on political maneuvering and the FBN's fabricated Gore files to force federal control. What are the Gore files? I had to look them up. So to understand successfully how cannabis was driven underground, we have to look closely at the mechanics of federal suppression that was used in the 30s. Specifically what the FBN, Federal Bureau of Narcotics, actually compiled and how they played Washington politics to get their ways. Now, doesn't this sound like really, really similar to how evidence was compiled back in the Crossfire hurricane operation, where evidence was manufactured against President Trump? It's the tactic over and over again. It's a playbook, guys, that they use. It's over and over again they use the same things. So always try to make that connection with what we're seeing today and the things that have happened in the past. So, within the FBN, the Commissioner Harry J. Anslinger maintained a notorious collection of sensationalized, largely unverified police reports, newspaper clippings, and anecdotes that became known internally and in media circles as the Gore files, the Epstein files, the alien files. There's always, some bunch of stuff that this is a language they've used. So FBN had the Gore files, just like the FBI has had the Epstein files for how many years now? All right, so, of course, let me clarify that. I personally believe that most of them were destroyed before Trump took over. So I think a lot of the evidence that was seized by the Florida U.S. Attorney, I think those were sanitized, but we are hearing about a burn bag that's been found, so we'll see what that brings. So anyway, when journalists, lawmakers, or public forums would ask this guy, Anslinger, for proof of cannabis's danger, he'd weaponize these files that he put together. In reality, modern historians and archivists have shown that these accounts were heavily distorted. They routinely misattributed pre-existing psychological illnesses or completely unrelated criminal acts to the plant, using them as raw propaganda to shock the public and manipulate legislators. So you got crazy people, and they're saying it's the marijuana that did it. Aren't we seeing that somewhere else too? We just recently discussed that before, that some of these studies they've done, a recent study on cancer, that was done, where it was self-reported results through teledocs. How do you conduct a study with self-reported results? That's basically what this was. So the push to pass the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was a masterclass in bureaucratic self-preservation and backroom strategy. When the FBN faced political budget cuts following the repeal of alcohol, Prohibition, Anslinger used political maneuvering by intentionally bypassing open, objective, scientific debate. Does this sound familiar to anything that happened around 2020 and beyond? Instead of consulting medical professionals or referencing actual clinical data, the FBN coordinated closely with sympathetic media conglomerates such as William Randolph Hearst and his newspaper empire to release synchronized waves of moral panic. See, back then in the 30s, they didn't own all the media. They had certain ones that they worked with. And if you ever heard, underneath the Hearst mansion, there's a whole lot of tunnels. So it's all going to start to fit in, guys, I promise. Furthermore, when the American Medical Association actively testified before Congress against this ban on marijuana, they explicitly warned that cannabis had legitimate medical value and that criminalization would harm patients, just like the many medical experts did when it came to COVID-19. Remember that? As we've seen many times, the testimony of the AMA was marginalized for political reasons, relying instead on the sensationalized fear that was generated by the Gore files and cinematic propaganda to force the bill through Congress. That's how it works. Bogus science, put together a lot of media reports, experts, everybody's blah, 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 this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. And then the media takes over and echoes it in the echo chamber. And this is how brainwashing works, guys. So just as federal drug regulators were beginning to demand rigorous scientific proof, safety standards, and synthetic isolation for pharmaceuticals, cannabis was pulled out of the medical conversation entirely. Instead of being evaluated through clinical trials or peer-reviewed pharmacology, it was routed through the Treasury Department and the criminal justice system based on propaganda and social prejudice alone. And by 1942, just 5 years after the Tax Act, cannabis was officially removed from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, which effectively severed a 1,000-year history as a recognized medicine and setting the stage for decades of prohibition. So for nearly a century, the wisdom of traditional plant medicine was pushed into the shadows. But modern science has finally begun to map why those historical remedies worked so well all along. The breakthrough came decades after Prohibition began. In 1964, 2 Israeli scientists successfully isolated and structured THC and CBD. Now, there's many other components in it as well, but these are the 2 big ones that you'll hear about. That chemical milestone blew the door open, leading to the monumental discovery of the human body's own endocannabinoid system in 1988. And that was followed by the mapping of CB1 and CB2 receptors throughout the body and the identification of our entire endocannabinoid system. Science proved that humans are literally hardwired with a biological network designed to process these marijuana plant compounds. Can you believe it? I just find it so hard to believe, guys. Independent researchers later formalized what traditional healers always knew, and it's known as what's called the entourage effect. Studies have demonstrated that full-spectrum extracts, where multiple cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids work in concert, exert a more comprehensive therapeutic impact than isolated single-component chemicals. So not only in marijuana, but so that you understand, that's the reason I choose the RSO. It contains all of the terpenes, the different cannabinoids, and the alkaloids that go along with it. So once again, nature knows better than man, but the government still refuses to allow Americans to grow cannabis at home. No doubt, that's heavily influenced by the pharmaceutical industry's influence. And it comes down to a fundamental clash between modern corporate drug control and the nature of botanical medicine. Because that's what we're talking about here, guys. It's botanical medicine. So why did it take 100 years, right? Of course, we must ask ourselves, if the science and history point to clear therapeutic value, why has it taken a century to restore access of beneficial and safe natural products to Americans? The delay was never about public health. It was driven by bureaucratic design. First, there was the Schedule I trap. Following the political maneuvers of the 1930s, the passage of the Controlled Substance Act of 1970 officially classified cannabis as Schedule I, a Schedule I drug, right along with heroin. And basically that means that there's no currently acceptable use for it or medicinal use, and that it has a high potential for abuse. So they right there lied, saying there was no currently accepted use. It's only because they buried it. The Schedule I classification created an almost impenetrable wall of bureaucratic hurdles, expensive licensing, and restricted access that choked off any independent clinical research. For generations, scientists were effectively barred from conducting the gold standard randomized controlled trials that were needed to study the plant safely and openly. President Trump recently signed an executive order instructing the Attorney General to expedite and complete the rulemaking process to move marijuana from Schedule I to Schedule III, which is a start, but it keeps Americans dependent on Big Pharma. We need to be able to grow botanicals. Just like we grow basil, we need to be able to grow marijuana. Not to sell. Trafficking should still be illegal. But if we make our botanicals and we grow our botanicals and we don't profit off of them, I don't see any problem with that. And we don't, of course, there should be an 18 age limit. We don't give any, ever share it with anybody that's 18, even for free. Under 18, even for free. That's just my opinion after years and years of so many different disciplines in this biological this striving for biological health. Okay, so subsequently the DOJ, after they made it a schedule, after Trump made it a Schedule III now, the DOJ issued an order that placed state-regulated medical marijuana products and FDA-approved cannabis products into Schedule III. So you get that the states are regulating them. And, I mean, I don't have a problem with that. Like I said, I think it's important to disseminate control. And that's a really smart thing that President Trump is doing. It does, however, always create the vehicle for theft. Every program you open up that may be receiving some kind of money, and if it's just regulation, okay. But if we're going to be giving money, people are going to steal it. Okay, that's just how it goes. So that's the only problem I have there, is that I'm happy that it's being separated into state regulation. Although, one thing I really have to say is that's inconsistent with the mandate of FDA. If indeed these are medicinal, they should be studied. They should be regulated by FDA. If it's going to be over the counter, and you don't need a license for it, or you don't need a prescription for it, you can grow it. That is, in my opinion, where we should go with this, with restrictions as far as anything that's sold must be regulated and must be proven to be safe, because who knows what they could stick in there, right? They could stick cocaine in there, and they will, trust me. If profiteers can find a way to maximize the demand for their product, they will put anything in it. I've worked the cases, I've seen it. So personally, in this particular case, I'm all about separating distribution, but I also believe that because it is a drug, that it should be regulated as a drug centrally through the FDA. Okay, so my battery's starting to go, and I got a little bit more. Let's go. All right. Okay, so it's taken decades of patient advocacy, state-level resistance, and relentless independent research to dismantle the access barriers to marijuana. proving that the suppression of natural medicine was a political choice, not a scientific one, and it continues, at least for now. All right, now, to truly understand how whole plant medicine works, we have to look at the master regulatory network that controls our body. Not the regulatory network that controls the drugs, but that controls our body. The endocannabinoid system was discovered decades after the plant was outlawed. And we now know it acts as our body's internal control center, keeping things balanced when environmental and physical stressors that we encounter every day knock our bodies out of balance. Let me give you an example. When we catch a cold, experience sudden physical pain, get injured, deal with high-stress situations, or even just face extreme hot and cold temperatures, our internal systems, like our immune response, our body temperature, and our nervous systems, are all pushed out of their normal baseline activity. Our body is designed to have this internal control center that keeps everything working behind the scenes to adapt to those outside pressures and bring everything back to a stable, healthy baseline. So the endocannabinoid system is designed to fight off toxins in our food and make the body less reactive to their harmful effects. How fortuitous that it was outlawed right before the food industry started pumping us with processed foods full of toxic contaminants. CB1 receptors are the nervous system regulators, guys, and they are primarily concentrated in the brain and the central nervous system. These CB1 receptors manage neural activity, pain signaling, motor control, mood, and emotional processing. When phytocannabinoids, cannabinoids in plants, like THC, bind to these receptors, they can normalize or slow overactive neural firing, which is precisely how the body mutes perception of pain and calms acute stress responses. Then there's CB2 receptors, and they are the immune and peripheral defenders. They are found predominantly in peripheral immune tissues, white blood cells, the spleen, the GI system, bones, and joints. The CB2 receptors act as the immune system's braking mechanism. When activated, they help suppress runaway inflammation and protect peripheral tissues from damage without triggering the psychotropic effects associated with the CB1 receptors. Personally, when my hands become inflamed and painful, my medical marijuana brownies are one of the strongest natural substances for inflammation. Natural practitioners and independent researchers are increasingly embracing whole plant extracts because they address complex multi-system disorders through these exact neural pathways. While single-component extracts strip the plant down to isolated synthetic-style molecules, whole plant extracts, like Rick Simpson's oil, preserves the complete profile of cannabinoids and terpenes to harness the full power of the entourage effect, which is when all the natural components in a plant work together as a team to create a stronger healing effect than any single chemical could do on its own. So let's look at some of the well-documented beneficial effects of medical marijuana. Pain and inflammation. Chronic inflammatory conditions ranging from rheumatoid arthritis to neuropathic pain involve both the central nervous system and the peripheral immune cells. So while CB1 activation alters how the brain perceives pain signals, the CB2 activation directly targets immune cells to halt the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Now, the CB1 activation is the one that gets people high. You can buy all different blends if you want. If you do the plant, do it moderately, guys. When I make my brownies, I eat very, very small pieces, not enough to get high. So you have to understand that. Then there's anxiety and PTSD it's used for. The amygdala in the brain's emotional and threat detection center, and it's densely packed with these CB1 receptors. In trauma and PTSD, the endocannabinoid system is often dysregulated, leading to a failure in extinguishing fear, memories, and chronic paranoia. Whole-spectrum phytocannabinoids help restore tonic endocannabinoid levels, effectively cushioning the nervous system against chronic stress responses and calming the amygdala's overreactivity. This is something really important to consider in those chronic neurological conditions. Nausea and digestive disorders. The gut houses an extensive network of both CB1 and CB2 receptors, often referred to as the enteric nervous system. Cannabinoids interact with these receptors in the brainstem and the gastrointestinal tract to suppress the vomiting reflex and regulate gut motility, offering profound relief for conditions that conventional anti-nauseants often fail to control. All right, then there's emerging frontiers, emerging science. Beyond these core areas that have pretty well been accepted by now, science is examining endocannabinoid modulation for neurodegenerative support, metabolic balance, and sleep regulation. If you suffer from any of these conditions, you should listen to this. Rather than just protecting existing neurons, we have learned that the endocannabinoid system actively stimulates neurogenesis, guys, which is the birth of new brain cells, particularly in the hippocampus, the region that's responsible for memory and learning. Can you believe this? The idea that cannabis kills brain cells is one of the most enduring myths that has been left over from decades of governmental propaganda and flawed 1970s research. The myth traces back to a heavily criticized, highly flawed study conducted in the 70s known as the Heath study, where researchers exposed monkeys to massive suffocating doses of concentrated smoke through gas masks for minutes at a time, completely depriving their brains of oxygen. The resulting brain damage was caused by asphyxiation, not the cannabis plant itself. Subsequent rigorous studies have completely debunked this claim, proving instead that cannabinoids actually stimulate neurogenesis and protect existing neurons from oxidative stress and inflammation. By dampening chronic neuroinflammation and oxidative stress, phytocannabinoids help clear a path for cellular repair and cognitive preservation as we age. The endocannabinoid system also plays a critical role in regulating how our bodies store fat, process glucose, and respond to insulin. Furthermore, researchers have discovered a powerful communication exists between the endocannabinoid system and the gut microbiome. So by modulating or changing the intestinal signaling that's going on, cannabinoids can help maintain metabolic health and prevent systemic low-grade inflammation that's originating from our gut. Circadian rhythm and sleep architecture. The master clock in our brain relies on our endocannabinoid tone to regulate sleep-wake cycles. Modulating these pathways helps restore deep, restorative, slow-wave sleep, offering profound implications for those suffering from chronic insomnia and circadian disruption. So the journey from ancient healing practices to modern corporate pharmaceuticals demonstrates a continuous tug of war between the pharmaceutical, bureaucratic control, and the time-tested natural sovereignty of our own health. While single molecule components can have their place in targeted medicine and acute clinical settings, my personal preference is Rick Simpson oil, or RSO as they call it, and whole plant extracts that address complete biochemical synergy that nature intended it, proving that true healing often requires looking past the chemical lens and returning to the full power of the plant. So Tim's gonna, now we're gonna show you how to make the brownies that Tim makes for me, though he doesn't use them. And he's been bugging me to hurry up and get this done because he's so proud that he showed you guys how to make it. So anyway, that's coming up next. And let me know how it works out if you make them.
Hi, all you people out there. We're going to make some medicinal brownies. I like to call them Timmy's THC treats. You can call them whatever you want. All right, for this we're going to need olive oil, coconut oil, the THC, 2 eggs, and a brownie mix. And a little bit of water, 2 tablespoons of water as well. All right, the first thing we have to do is we have to heat up the olive oil. All right, for the baking pan, we have an 11 by 8 size pan, and you have to grease it, otherwise the brownies will not come out when you need them. So you take a little bit of coconut oil, spread it around evenly and on the sides because it's going to come up on the sides as well, and this will prevent it from sticking. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to get it on the sides. You might have to use your finger sometimes to get it on the sides. Maybe a little bit more. And this is unrefined, cold pressed coconut oil. All right, we're just waiting for the olive oil to get warm enough that we can add the THC, and then we'll be ready to start mixing. Looks good. All right, we're just waiting for the olive oil to get warm enough. You don't want to see any smoke coming out of it, so you want to shut it down before that. You will need a fairly large mixing bowl, and you'll also need a cup for the THC. It has to be heated with hot water, otherwise it won't come out. It comes in these packages when you buy it.
That's Rick Simpson oil.
This is the syringe. You can see it in there. If it's not heated, when you press it, it won't come out. So you have to heat it up with hot water. All right, here's what you have to do to get the THC warm enough that you can put it in the oil. Get a small cup of hot water. As you can see, the oil is right in here. Submerge it and make sure it stays in there. Use something to hold it down. And don't let the water go above here because it will leak in the syringe and you don't want that. Just leave it like that. Let that get nice and warm. And this is the brand here. We go to Sam's Club. We're not trying to promote Hershey's. This is the only one that they have.
Yeah.
All right, this is the brand that we've been using for a while to make the brownies. There are other brands. This is the one that we get because they sell it in bulk. All right, the oil is ready to go into the bowl. Just pour it in there. And that's half a cup of olive oil. That's what you need. All right, the THC should be warm enough by now. It doesn't take too long. All right, so you take the little cap off. And squirt it in around evenly, like this. It's still a little bit hard, but then you go like this. Use the hot oil, take a little bit up, squirt it back down. Normally do that 3 times, and that gets every drop of the THC. I'm a stickler for things like that. I like to get every drop I can out of anything. All right, now my spoon is here. All right, now can you see how that is in there? You don't want to leave it like that. You have to mix it around. Give it a good stir until it's dissolved in the hot oil. All right, that's pretty dissolved now. Whatever's still remaining there, the brownie mix will stir it up. All right, so that's half a cup of olive oil and 2 tablespoons of water. Put that in. Here we go. And you'll also need 2 eggs. For the recipe that the box says to use. Recipes can vary. This is the one that I've been using for a long time, and it works out fine every time. All right, so scramble it around. like you're baking a cake, which you are kind of. Make sure the egg gets into every nook and cranny of the oil. Like that. Alright, that is mixed. Now, use the whole package. It looks like it's going to be too much, but it's not. It's the perfect amount. Alright, now you want to give this a good stir. Get every little speck of it mixed in as best you can. See how thick it's becoming now? And whatever you do, do not let this get in the hands of children. All right. I'm very thorough with things that I want to do properly 100%. So I stir it this way for a long time, and then I'll give it the old hurricane rotation, just to make sure the THC gets into every nook and cranny, nothing gets wasted, everything is utilized.
You want it evenly distributed.
Evenly distributed throughout the entire batch. See, it's nice and thick now. And we are ready to pour into our baking pan. All right. And away we go. Nice and thick. Get as much as you can out of the bowl. And whatever's left over, you can just, like what you used to do when your mom used to bake a cake. She let you lick the bowl and the spoon. You can do the same thing with this. Just don't plan on driving anywhere. All right. That should do it. All right. We've already preheat the oven to 225. And let's get the brownies in there. And it's kind of ironic. The time that you put them in for is 420. You ever hear that saying, 420? 420 friendly? That's what it is. Well, I used to cook them for 5 hours sometimes, and I found that it was too long and it would kill the THC. They wouldn't have the proper effect. All right, and that is it. 4 hours and 20 minutes from now, you'll have a nice batch of brownies. And that's all you need. Very quick, very simple. Pretty simple cleanup too. And you get to lick the bowl.
I love you guys. Till next time, be healthy. Maybe we've got some ginger beer coming up soon. I know, we're going to do some ginger stuff soon. And also some manuka. We've got lots of good stuff coming up here. And also in the main channel. So I love you. Till next time, be healthy. Okay? Bye-bye.